Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the Ducks and Pucks podcast. This is kind of a special edition, Fight Club edition, Eddie. We got some new players in the Ducks that we're going to talk about that like to fight and mix it up in the enforcer role. We've got some other trades around the NHL we're going to talk about, that players that got moved as far as fighters go. And we're also going to talk about whether or not fighting is going downhill in the NHL. It's kind of been on the decline. We'll kind of tackle that issue as well. And get you caught up on some of the moves with the Ducks and kind of update some of our thoughts about the lineups and whatnot. But going back earlier in the week, the Ducks got two players, Eddie, McGrattan and Stewart. What are your thoughts? We'll start with McGrattan, pretty much an enforcer, was on Calgary for the last couple seasons. And what's your thought on this move?
I think it's a depth move. He kind of replaces Jackman if Jackman gets hurt or they want a different option on that fourth line. He's not going to play any higher than the fourth line. Probably play most of the season in San Diego as well. He's never scored more than 10 points in the NHL. I believe 8 points was his highest 2 seasons ago in 2013-2014 with Calgary, and that was in 76 games. So he's not going to add a whole bunch to the team. He's going to come in and be that enforcer, and just a guy that can kind of play a similar role to Tim Jackman.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to be in the AHL for most of the season. Like you said, unless something happens to Jackman, he may come in and play on the fourth line for a few games. He's only played, a handful of games for most of the seasons, except for 2 years ago in Calgary. He did play a majority of that season. But, yeah, I think maybe he comes in somewhere 6 to 12 games in the regular season for the Ducks at most, Eddie, and we'll talk about it later, but maybe he gets paired up against Lucic, when we play LA or something like that. But it looks like it's going to be a limited amount of time in the NHL. The next move, which some people were surprised about, Eddie, was Chris Stewart. And what are your thoughts on this? A right wing that we picked up that played on Buffalo and then, finished last year with Minnesota.
Yeah, it's a tough situation for Chris Stewart. You look at a lot of his seasons, there's a lot of promise. He was drafted in the first round and 18th overall in 2006. Had a great sophomore season, 64 points in 77 games, and followed up with some pretty good performances in Colorado and St. Louis. But he moved on to Buffalo, had struggled in the beginning of the season. And then went over to Minnesota and had a pretty decent run with 11 points in 20 games. And he's kind of a wild card. He still has some potential. He's only 27, but he's going to be a physical guy. Obviously a more offensive upside than McGrattan has, and he could put up around 40, 50 points if he's playing on the right line with the right guys. And he had 11 fights last season too, so he's going to definitely add to that tough side.
Yeah, I think this, move is going to add kind of several dimensions, like you said. I mean, he likes to get in there and mix it up. We posted some videos, if you haven't seen it, on our Facebook page as well. Facebook.com/DucksNPucks blog. If you go on there, we posted some videos of different fights. You can check them out. You can also go to YouTube as well and just plug in his name. So he's definitely going to bring that element. And I do think he's going to bring some secondary scoring, Eddie. I mean, if you look at his seasons. A lot of them he scored in the high 20s or in the mid 30s. As you mentioned, he had a couple really good seasons with Colorado. Obviously that was 4 or 5 seasons ago. But I think he's going to be able to put up some good points. I don't know if he'll get 20 plus goals, but I think he can definitely get 30 to 40 points, Eddie.
Yeah, I know we'll probably see him play on the third line. You'd expect him to play on the right wing, and you'd see Perry and Silverberg slotting in above him, and we'll talk about the lineups later, but probably see Cogliano and Sekac move on to the left wing. So you would see him maybe playing on a third line with maybe Maroon and Raquel or Horcoff and Maroon, or if you want to go tough, or I just don't see him slotting in above anybody, but there's no way he drops all the way down to the fourth line.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the poll question we put out, I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but we put it out there, and overwhelming majority believes that he's going to be on the third line, and I agree with you as well. So I think that's how it's going to shape up. So these are the last couple moves that have happened this past week. You think any other moves may happen, Eddie? Some people are wondering if we're going to do anything on the defense, maybe, or get another forward, a left wing type of forward, or what are your thoughts?
I think they're pretty much done getting forwards. I'd be surprised if another forward came in. I think with McGrattan coming in for the AHL and Chris Stewart coming in, I think they're pretty much full. You don't want to get into a situation where you had last year where you've got guys who can make a contribution sitting out and you're basically paying them to not play any games. So I think right now, I think they're set unless there's a trade that's made. On defense, it's a tougher situation. There's not a lot of guys left, and by the looks of it, I think they want to go with Stoner as that number six guy and Holter as the number seven, since they signed him to the one-way deal. So I think Oduya coming in is probably not realistically going to happen. He's still out there, so obviously, there's a possibility, but I think if he was going to be signed by now, they probably would have made a big push for him.
Yeah, it seems like the Ducks may be done for now, unless, like you said, they do a trade or whatnot. I think with the lineup we have now, and we'll go into it in a little bit. It's pretty much lined up pretty good. I think the Ducks are going to be fine. You also mentioned Holzer as well, going to on his contract to the AHL, most likely to start the season. You still have Josh Manson that could come up as well. Obviously Theodore's name has been thrown around, which, maybe is a less likely candidate. So there's still some other players that could come up and handle that situation. So I think we're good there. I think the interesting thing that some people are looking at is this nature of having more enforcers in the league. And some of the stats that have come out in the last couple of years, Eddie, if you can go over those real quick. But the fighting majors basically have gone down in the NHL over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and if you go way back down to 2010, 2011, they had a total of 903 fights, and then the next season it goes down to 768. In the half season it goes down to 394, which is still around 780. Dropped down to 694 in 2013, 2014, and then last season it was only 555 fights. And you look at the leader in 2010, 2011 is George Peros had 30 fights that season, and Derek Dorsett had 20, and it just drops off from there. So I think the enforcer is leaving the game. If you look at most of these guys who put up a lot of fights, some of them still had over 15, 20 points, which it's hard to call them just an enforcer when they're still putting up some good numbers as well. So I think the John Scott, that kind of role is really diminishing from the game.
Yeah, and what's interesting though is the Ducks did go out and get enforcer types, and they do have enforcer types on the team. So even with the numbers going down, it seems like maybe that's another element that Murray wanted to add. That's an element that the Ducks had for the younger fans. Maybe you haven't seen it, but in the early '90s, the Ducks had Todd Ewan and Stu Grimson, and they were the ones that pretty much handled their business whenever the opposing team went after Solani or Korea. So maybe they're trying to bring a little bit of that back. You look at Jackman, he had 11 fights last year. Stewart also had 11. Stoner had 10. Maroon had 9. So you've got a mix of players on there, Eddie, that, we may see some more Fight Club action, at Honda Center this next season.
Yeah, and 2 seasons ago, McGrattan also had 13, and so there's a lot of guys who can drop the gloves, and it's not as necessary as it was 4 or 5 seasons ago, but we have the guys who can do it, and you're playing in a tough Western Conference. You look at the LA picking up Lucic, they still have Clifford over there as well. There's a lot of guys who can drop the glove there, and Chicago picking up Garbett as well. So there's a lot of guys who you have to drop the gloves in the Western Conference, and we've got guys who can match up with them.
Yeah, and I think it's a welcome sight too. I mean, because this too, Eddie. When you have guys of that nature, sometimes things can happen and they can get injured and be in and out. Like we remember Jackman was out for a little bit, so we may see McGrattan come up and play for Jackman, or if the Ducks don't go for that, you still have Stewart, even though he can score as well. He can mix it up. It's going to be interesting. I think this Ducks team is going to be much more physical this season, and I think. that might have been the goal for the team because going deep in the playoffs, we took care of Winnipeg and Calgary no problem, and we couldn't take down Chicago, obviously, as everybody knows. But I think adding a little bit of size, being able to get in on the forecheck and wear down the other team's defense a little bit better, may be part of the remedy that Murray's looking to take that extra step, Eddie.
Yeah, and you look at the players we lost to, Palmieri and Bielski. They can play that forecheck role, and that's the way the Ducks want to play. And Stewart fits into that perfectly. And if you're losing Edom as well, you bring in Hagelin, who has a lot of speed and a lot of skill. So you kind of replace the players you lost with similar players. But I think in each way they're an upgrade. Stewart's an upgrade on Palmieri, I believe, and Hagelin's an upgrade on Edom and Bielski. And I think you still don't take away from the identity that the Ducks want to play. So I think it's not gonna be a real different team than what we saw last year. But I definitely think they improved.
Yeah, I agree, and we'll get to a lot of the fan questions too. There's some touched on that. With the addition of these players that we have now, and kind of what we think it's going to be going into next season. What do you think as far as the lineups? How do you think they shake out? The first line, if we go with what we've done before, Maroon, Getzlaf, and Perry on the top line, how do you think the other three lines shake out?
Well, obviously there was some worry with signing Stewart and him being primarily a right wing, and there aren't a lot of guys who we think we could move over to left wing. But if you look at obviously it's not a hugely reliable source to where they're going to play in the season. But the Ducks website under the roster section they've listed Cogliano, Hagelin, Maroon and Sekach as left wings. And, that's kind of what we talked about too. We knew Cogliano's played on the left before. He could go back and play there. Sekach has played on the left, and, he could play on the left if he wants. And, that kind of evens it out. You could put those four on the left. You could put Tim Jackman, Perry, Silverberg, and Stewart on the right. And then you could put Horcoff, Raquel, Kessler, and Getzlov up the middle. And then you've got those four lines and, even four lines again. And I think that's probably realistically what we'll see near the start of the season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the second line will be the key. If the Ducks go with Hagelin, Kessler, and Silverberg, I think that line is going to be a quick, punching line that's going to get out there and score. And if they go with the third line of, Cogliano, Raquel, Stewart, that may be also another line with some speed and some size. And then, obviously the fourth line will be a mix of whatever's left over. But I think that's kind of what we're going to see, barring, someone from San Diego, really impressing the team and coming up, which – we've heard that Murray's kind of hesitant on that, but you never know. We may see someone crack up in the lineup there, but that's how it's going to look. The defensive pairings, we've talked about it. There's not really much of a change, in that. You got Bieksa coming in, most likely fitting in Boschemann's spot and playing with Lindholm, so I don't see too much on the defense that being changed.
No, yeah, it's really just the offense with the addition of Stewart. It kind of throws things in a little loop, and on defense, unless somebody gets added like Oduya or somebody else from free agency, which doesn't appear likely now, you will pretty much see those six guys come in and Holzer, Manson holding in the 7 and 8 slot.
I agree. And looking at this week, we've got a lot of questions again, and we thank you all for the questions. We're going to get to some of them right now, so we can address some of the issues with the team, and Eddie and I can share our thoughts with you as well. One of the questions we had was from Mike Thomas. He asked, what was the overall grade that you'd give the Ducks post-draft and off-season moves? And what grade would you give them, Eddie, given up to this point as we record the show now?
I'd have to give them an A. I don't think they deserve an A+. I think adding a guy like Oduya and replacing Stoner with him would have been, that little bit of an addition to give them an A+. But I think they had a great offseason. Still adding Hagelin in replace of Edom was great, and bringing in Horcoff to fill up Thompson's spot until he comes back from injury is definitely a good move for them. And getting Stewart recently and Bieksa was one of my favorite moves as well. Getting that gritty defenseman that we've been waiting for, and even adding Khudobin, I didn't love the move. I would have liked to keep Wisniewski and bring him as the sixth guy, but allowing John Gibson to go back down to the AHL and hone his craft was still a good move for them. So I'd still give them an A. It was a really good offseason.
I agree, and I would give the Ducks an A as well. I think you're right. I think Hagelin coming in and replacing the Bolesky's spot is pretty good. Stewart as well coming in, taking either the Palmieri or Edom spot is going to work out as well. And like you said, Horcoff coming in, as everybody knows, Thompson's going to be out for at least 2 or 3 months. So that's another good addition. And, I think the key to all these players too, Eddie, that were added is at least in the forward position, Stewart and Horcoff are 1-year deals. McGrattan's a 1-year deal. So there's a lot of, high upside to adding all these players and low risk in terms of, finances, because the Ducks are still just only a little bit above the salary floor.
Yeah, and there's still a little bit of pressure though to win. Now you've got all these guys at 1 years, and you've got a lot of guys you got to re-sign next year. So, realistically, if some guys can't come back next year, the team could look different again in a few areas. So, you would hope that this would be the team they'd be able to win with, and then they'd be able to afford to let some guys go.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a topic that's going to have to be discussed at the RFAs as well coming up. Not right now. I mean, obviously, Hagelin, Silverberg, and Wagner are the three that are still up in the air, and at least at the moment that we record this right now, they haven't been re-signed. Maybe something will change in the next couple hours after we release our podcast. But as of right now, that's where we're at. So I don't really see them doing anything too much more in the next couple weeks, like you had talked about, unless there's some kind of a trade or whatnot. Another question we had was from Eddie, our buddy out in Colorado. He asked, how does Brian McGrattan fit into the Ducks team? He mentioned Maroon and Jackman can drop the gloves and have more skill. And I think you and I already covered this, Eddie, but, McGrattan's going to fit in, probably only playing half a dozen games this season for the Ducks.
Yeah, he'll start in San Diego and play there for most of the season, if not all of the season. I don't see him breaking into any role unless it's Jackman who gets hurt or somebody gets hurt and you have to push Jackman or Wagner up onto the third line. I think he pretty much stays in the AHL all season. He's just there for insurance, hence the 1-year deal. And there's not much he can do other than play that enforcer role. He's not going to score more than 10 points of the season if you're lucky. So, I think he, like you said, stays in San Diego for most of the year.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't see him coming up too much, unless, a special matchup situation, like we said, maybe with Lucic or whatnot against LA or a couple of the other teams that we'll mention that have some tough guys that have switched teams. Another question we had was from Phil. He asked about Stewart being signed, which we got him as a right winger, and why didn't we go get a left winger? And I think you addressed this, Eddie, already. You can flip cogs over to the other side. But I think looking at the free agents out there, I don't really think there was that many left wings out there. The only other one that some people have mentioned, Eddie, was Simon out of Carolina, but it looks like the Ducks weren't interested in him.
Yeah, and you look at them. Toulouse's a left wing who could play center. Scotty Opshell's, he's kind of a left wing and a right wing. Stepniak's a right wing. Santorelli's a center. The only two orthodox left wings are Glenn Cross and Bergenheim. And, who would you rather have in this situation? I think, Cogliano can play left wing and Sekac can play left wing well. So I think if you're going to bring in the best guy available, Stewart was the best option over both of them.
I completely agree in the way that he can play overall and not just scoring, but he adds that physical presence, which, is something that Simon lacked too a little bit on the defense. So I think Stewart was a better fit, as you had mentioned. We had Bobby who asked a question about Oduya. He wanted to know, do you think the Ducks will sign another defenseman? In general, he asks, and then he, punches in Oduya in the tweet there. So, we've kind of talked about this. Do you think the Ducks try to go after Oduya? And if not, anybody else, Eddie?
Well, if you look at the guys available, there's only really 3 who are an upgrade on Stoner, arguably. Tim Gleason, not much of an upgrade. Andre Mazzaro, Slemko, Wisnowski, Volchenkov. They're not real big upgrades that it's worth going out to get them for. And, not all of them will be looking for a 1-year deal. So I think with those guys, you kind of stick with Stoner in that 6th spot. And then, Ehrhoff is not really the type of defenseman we need. And, he's going to want term and money, so it's not worth going after him. And then it comes down to Franz and Oduya. And Franz probably hasn't been signing because he's looking for a lot of money in longer term. And then it comes down to Oduya, and that's pretty much everybody who, I want Oduya, and a lot of people want him to come to the Ducks, but I believe, you look at all the rumors out that he wants to go back down to Chicago, which is a little bit difficult now with that Patrick Sharp trade bringing in Daly to Chicago. So it's gonna be interesting how that plays out, but I really don't see him coming over now. I think if it was going to get done, they would have done it sooner.
Yeah, I agree. I think, money in term is definitely going to be an issue there if we were to try to get Aduya. And, you mentioned that trade too, that trade between Dallas and Chicago came out just a few days ago, and, everybody kind of went nuts over it. You saw Sharp leave Chicago and go to Dallas, and then you see Garbett, who's, I know, everybody's fan favorite here in Anaheim, and Daly, who's also another fan favorite, that both went to Chicago. So, it's going to be interesting because, like we talked about the enforcer role, throughout this podcast, and you look at the West, there's a lot of players on a lot of teams that we're going to have to face and deal with. So we're going to see Garbett and Daly, who we had fun with in the playoffs a couple years ago. You've got John Scott, who we loved at San Jose, who's now going to the Coyotes, and then obviously Lucic from Boston to LA. So it's going to be kind of interesting, Eddie. And I think that, I think like you said before, the Ducks are going to stay with their same game plan. But I do think the Ducks added, Stewart and McGrattan and these types, just for these kind of situations, to maybe bring those, a little bit of a balance to the game against these kind of players. Because we're going to face all these teams. We're going to face all these players, Eddie, next season.
Yeah, I know. As if the Dallas Stars didn't score enough goals last season, it kind of doesn't seem like the right move for them adding a guy like Patrick Sharp. They didn't really need offense, and they gave up one of their best defensemen in Daly to Chicago, and bringing in a prospect who is arguably a D prospect, and maybe they believe he can start next season. But you look at who they have now. They've got Spezza, Sharp, Sagan, Nichushkin, Hemsky, and Ben as their top two lines. Those are lines that can compete with almost anyone in the NHL, and a great pull by the Stars, but their D is looking really weak now, and everybody assumed that Chicago was going to have to make this trade to stay under the cap, and even in their situation, they only really saved about $1 million in cap space. So there's a lot of rumors out there that Daly might be flipped now.
Yeah, and that's the next question. We put out a little poll that I made together and threw it out on our Twitter account, and it was whether or not they would try to flip Daly and sign Oduya, or let Oduya walk. And it was kind of interesting. More people were going with the notion that they're going to keep Daly, which I don't know. I mean, Daly's brings toughness too. But of the two between Daly and Oduya, I think I would take Oduya, Eddie. But maybe it's that financial issue, and again, this trade, like you said, didn't really save them a whole lot of money. So maybe they are going to just keep Daly. I don't know. What do you think?
It's hard, there's not a lot of money saved there, like you said, and Aduya obviously wants to go back to Chicago where he's won 2 cups, so it's hard to know what they're thinking. There's obviously got to be some discussion going on between Oduya and Chicago if no deals come from any other team for Oduya. So we'll just have to wait and see. It's a situation you just kind of got to wait on.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting. Say, nobody asked us this, but this is maybe a good hypothetical. Say Chicago keeps Daly. They don't get Oduya done, and Oduya doesn't come to the Ducks. Is there any team out there that you think would be on the top 1 or 2 lists of Oduyas that he might go to?
You got to put Dallas up there too. Just losing Daly, I'm sure they're pursuing him now. Getting Sharp and Oduya, and only losing Daly would be a great pickup for them, and I think they're probably at the top of the list. And other than that, there's a lot of teams out there looking for defense, but you got to put Dallas up there now, especially with their poor, goals against average last year.
Now, and that would be a crazy move. I mean, could you imagine that Dallas made the trade? They did make the trade, but they make that trade and then they go get Aduya. I mean, Dallas would be an extremely scary team, Eddie, having Sharp and Aduya on that team if it was able to happen.
Yeah, and obviously picking up Niemi from San Jose, they're going to be running Niemi and Lettinen next season as well. So if Oduya ends up going there, they're going to be a scary team to face in that Central Division next year.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think Dallas is going to be a tough team. And we talked about teams making the playoffs next year. And last week I talked about Buffalo, and I said how they may make the playoffs and that they were a dark horse. But the news came out a little bit earlier before we recorded this podcast, and Ryan O'Reilly, I guess, decided to go drinking and driving and crash in a building and flee the scene. So I don't know what's going to happen in Buffalo. Maybe I want to take back my pick, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Buffalo now with this mess, especially after him signing that big deal, Eddie. With the NHL doing the things that they've been doing with the LA Kings and all that, I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in Buffalo now with Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, and like you said, especially after signing that big deal, it's kind of a stupid thing to do, and it's right in my region in Middlesex County in Ontario, and it's just crazy. You don't know what's gonna happen. It's really up to the Sabres now to decide what they're gonna do, and puts them in a difficult decision after signing that huge $7.5 million AAV contract. So you're gonna have to wait in the coming days to see what they end up doing.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting because you know more about the Canadian law than I do, but in the U.S. and California, I mean, if you get a regular DUI, it's one thing. It's a misdemeanor and it's jail time, a little bit, the fines and whatnot. It's not as serious. I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this, I'm not telling you to go do it, but I'm just saying if you do one and you're just driving, it's not as bad. But when you go crash or you hit people or you hit a building and also fleeing the scene, I mean, you're talking about extra. At least in the U.S., you're talking about felonies being added and jail time being increased and all kinds of crazy stuff. So I'm really curious to see how they're going to handle it up there in Canada, and if he's going to be available at all or for part of next season. And it's just going to be interesting how that plays out because you got him, you did this big deal, and then this happened right after. And I mean, this really throws a wrench. And what Buffalo's trying to do in the offseason, Eddie.
Yeah, and you may see something similar to the Voinov situation where he's not allowed to play until everything's settled in court, and that's pretty much the most likely option right now. And it all comes down to the Sabres, what they decide with the NHL, and ultimately what happens in court if he ends up getting charged and sentenced to jail time or whatever happens.
Yeah, and as far as me picking Buffalo last week, I'll still go with Buffalo. I'll stay strong, Eddie. But I mean, I'm not going to change my mind. But I mean, it's gonna be kind of ugly up there, and that's really unfortunate. These situations that we see are coming out a little bit more and more now. Especially with LA as well. So it's going to be interesting. We'll keep our eye on that, see how it goes. But as far as the Ducks go, it's going to be interesting, Eddie. I can't wait till October comes up. We're going to have tickets that we're going to give away to opening night again in a similar fashion. We'll do a contest probably end of July, beginning of August, somewhere in that point, where we'll give away some tickets to the opening game. We're still also giving away our T-shirts. We'll be doing that for July and August on the Facebook website as well. So just keep following along for those giveaways and stuff. We'll have more stuff coming up in the October, time, and that's it. Got nothing else to add, Eddie, unless you got anything to close out with. Any final thoughts or anything on this week?
No, other than the opening night's on my birthday, which is gonna be pretty awesome. Other than that, good luck to whoever ends up winning the tickets.
Well, maybe we'll fly you down, Eddie.
Yeah, I wish. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I know. I mean, we're doing well at DucksNPucks, but unfortunately, we're not a huge conglomerate yet. But thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it, and we'll be back next week. Hopefully, we'll have some more news for you. If not, maybe in 2 weeks, but we'll see how it goes in the summer. And thanks for the support. Let's go, Ducks!
The Anaheim Ducks are the Stanley Cup champions.